I preface this, but it's a form of cowardice. You have to learn to just jump out and do things.
What David Lynch advice do you incorporate into your writing?
There's a thing that Brian Cutler calls sometimers, and sometimes I have lapses. I don't think it's age. I think what happens when you get older, and I'm not that old. I'm not suggesting that I'm old. I just feel that you start accumulating so much data in the brain that there's a retrieval system, right? So David Lynch has given a lot of advice that I had made every effort to take to heart. The one piece that I really liked was his idea, and I followed it for developing my first feature. So I developed a feature, which I don't talk about the name yet because the name is kind of fun, and you know the name because I gave it to you in a confidential note, and you know what the name is. But I finished my first feature last year, and it was quite a labor of love because it took a lot of energy to put that together. And I first started with David Lynch, then I worked with Anthony DiBlasi. David Lynch would say, you take some 3x5 cards or index cards, and you write down, put down a scene, and then you start to develop a set of cards, and you think in your mind what these scenes might be. Then you organize them into some kind of a story, and then when you've got 76 dozen, 5 dozen scenes, you've got a movie. So that's one thing that I really listened to, and I did do, but I used a computer. Of course, I used the Final Draft 12, I used the program to make the cards because they have an aspect of the program where you can make a beat board and you can make index cards. But I met a lady that was a writer for Star Trek, and she just used a legal pad. She actually never touched a computer. She had a secretary, and she was working on a hit TV show. So she had someone else retype everything, but whatever your system is, starting with the scenes. I found that to be much more powerful because you can just sit there and just write scenes and write dialogue and all that, but it doesn't glue it together in my mind. It's like writing a book. You start to lose track. So with David Lynch, he suggested that you just make scenes and develop these scenes into, some kind of card system. In my case, it was a virtual card system. And it worked. It worked for me to make my first feature. And I did. I finished writing the feature. And I did 11 revisions, but that's where I started, was with the David Lynch idea.
Can you talk about how you write in fragments? Is that similar to what you're talking about, the David Lynch idea with these cards?
So thank you for prompting me on that, the fragments. I do give David Lynch some credit, but I also have to credit Anthony DiBlasi because he criticized with a kind heart. Anthony DiBlasi and I are great friends. I just saw him. He came over to LA. He does not live in Los Angeles now. And we had lunch and had a great time at lunch. And he had suggested that I not try to write these, you're talking about what the scene is all about. As you write a screenplay, you have to talk about it. There's a little section where you explain what's about to happen for those people who are not formal screenwriters. So before the dialogue, you're explaining the setup, right? And he said, look, it's too much. You're writing too many words. And so what you should do is just write in fragments and use fragments. So as opposed to saying, he came upon a beautiful white mansion with a beautiful picket fence, and it had really green grass that was nicely mowed and all that. It'd be better just to say, he arrived to a big mansion, beautiful place, looks like it cost $10 million or something shorter, something less. First of all, there's a good reason for that. You don't want your screenplay to be this huge monster of a document, a brick of paper, with too much detail. Some people like it, other people don't need that. Also, it can be a nightmare for your production designer or your location person, because now they imagine, if you've ever done casting, that they just upload the script into the software and it pulls out all of these details and it turns it into auditions, like characters and auditions. And so a lot of what you're writing, it can be taken as gospel. The costumer, the production designer, the location manager could be looking at this going, we have to find that's what Mr. Spencer wants, and we've got to have that exact look. It's got to be that exact look. Where it may not be that important to me, and you may have noticed something about my writing. I don't put ages on the characters. Did you notice that? Yeah, there's no ages. And that I learned from my auditioning as an actor. Anthony DiBlasi wrote the age of the character that I worked on, Malum, was 25 years old. But I took a look at it and realized that the casting director just loads this up from the script. They don't specifically have to be 25 years old because it's a cop at a police department. What does it matter? He could be a 25-year-old cop. He could be a 50-year-old cop. So I auditioned, and I got the audition. When Anthony hired me, he sent out the revised script, and the age of the character was raised in the final version when he gave it to me. So there's some pliability there. But when you're too specific about anything, age of characters, ethnicity, descriptions, I'll tell you the peril of it too. I was managing a TV star. I had a client who was a star. Again, don't like to mention names for the very simple reason that someone could get offended, right? You say the wrong thing and they get offended. So rather than talk about the person specifically, let me talk about what happened. I really pushed hard to get a meeting with the head of casting over at Paramount Pictures. And the casting department said, sure, we'd like to meet your guy, have you bring him over and let's do an audition. He received the script, and the script said boy number 1. And I didn't think twice about it. I was like, okay, it's some teenager. He's a 22 and he plays teenagers, right? He's a star in a show where he plays a teenager. And, he was immediately like, F this, I'm not going to go to this audition. Boy number 1, he was a man of color. So he got very offended by the idea that he's going to play boy number 1. And I'm like, no, please understand something. They don't know the ethnicity of this character yet because they're open to whomever might play it. They want anybody to be able to play it. So nowadays, they're more specific and say any ethnicity or whatever. They just now say that. But back in the day, the screenwriter might just say, boy number 1, man number 1, because he didn't want to have a name to limit the potential ethnicities of these characters, right? So writing in fragments might be helpful in a lot of ways. I took it one step further and talked about the characters as well as the setups, where you're going with the screenplay.
Do you ever have writer's block?
So do I ever have writer's block? No, I think writer's block is a nonsense. I think that's nonsense. I think that you're limiting belief that your writing is going to be bad. You just don't write it. You're afraid to write it. It's fear or whatever. You can call it writer's block, but it's really just being, I'm not criticizing anybody. I preface this, but it's a form of cowardice. You have to learn to just jump out and do things. I didn't have these freedoms to hold back. When I was 16, I was on my own. I did not have anybody telling me, don't touch the hot stove. There's nobody there telling me to not do things. So I'm self-managed. They refer to that as emancipated. I wasn't legally emancipated. In fact, I was surprised I could get along in life without having to be emancipated. But when you're doing the whole, do I have writer's block? I can't write this thing. I have a literary agent who scored me some really good book deals, and Matt Wagner with FreshBooks. And Matt really inspired me to understand that everybody writes at different paces. I don't think my early writing, my first book, I don't think was well written at all, but I had good editors. I think I really was learning on the job training. But sometimes I wrote more than I needed to, and it was probably not that good. I could have pulled it back a little bit and just been more careful. So I may have the opposite issue, which is I might tend to write too freely, where it may not be as carefully crafted as it could be. And I remember working on my project with Kathy Ireland, and one of the managers there said, when I say manager, I don't mean my manager, I mean a talent manager. So, it's like you have to know the context of the word manager. It means different things in different contexts. So the lexicon of entertainment, a manager is a person who is the manager for talent. So one of the other talent managers said, your writing's good, but it's sometimes a little bit, too loosey-goosey. I'm like, I didn't really understand what he meant at the time. And then I started to really study writing because I'm not formally trained. So every single day I'm looking at different words. What do they mean? stationary versus stationary. People don't realize it's two different words. They're spelled differently. I started to have to spend more time understanding it. So the only thing I really stumble on is this going to be interesting or not? I may just have trouble putting it down because of that, but I don't have a problem writing stuff. I never have writing block. If I have a deadline, I'm supposed to do something, I have a book deadline or I have to deliver, I will just deliver it. I will make it happen. Whether it's my best work or not, it just depends on how much time I put into it, honestly.
So you said something interesting about how you never had anybody telling you, don't do that, and in a sense that gave you a freedom to just try all these new things without worry or fear?
Yes, this can get a little political, and I'm going to stay away from the political aspect of it because it is part of public education. Because I couldn't stand public education. I literally was pulling out my hair. It was so excruciating. In fact, when I wanted to get a college degree, I went to the counselor for public education and I said, again, I don't like to mention names because these are great organizations that somebody gets value from. Someone goes, wow, I enjoyed that experience. But a well-known college. And the counselor said, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about you. After I gave her my story, she's like, you're not going to make it here. I said, what? You're not going to make it here? What do you mean I'm not going to make it here? This is going to be way too slow for you. You're just not going to like it. I mean, I'm not trying to discourage you, but you're going to die here. It's going to be tough. I believed her because every time I thought about it, I realized that everything I needed to know by the time we got into the mid-90s, any information I needed to know is, out in the public domain now. All the knowledge I need is out there. And I probably learned more in the past 5 years about writing than I knew in the first, decades of my life. I've learned more because it's all available online now through video courses, through YouTube, through asking the AI systems to tell me, answer questions about stuff. So, I never had anything stopping me from trying. I believe firmly, again, I really made an effort to observe the super achievers. And because I think I'm a normal person, when I see somebody who's ultra successful, it's not envy. I don't envy the ultra successful people. I admire them for their achievements. There's a big difference between being bitter and resentful and envious and looking at someone who's successful. There's a reason they were super successful. It's not like they won the lottery. If they won the lottery, there's nothing really to admire other than, hey, good for you. But when you see somebody who's a director who's super successful and you ask the question, it's like Christopher Nolan has said this. He didn't go to film school. He didn't have a formal film school education, and yet he's making movies that I truly adore. Some of the movies he does, Interstellar, it's such a wonderful movie, and I've watched it many times. And so when somebody tells you that their story was, I'm failing, it's great, I'm loving the failure, I tell folks, they're like, how did you become such a great cook? You're such a good cook. You're so good. I said, I'm really not that good, but I'm smart enough to throw the bad stuff away. It's like, when you're a bad cook is when you're letting people try the mistakes. When you're a good cook, you're smart enough to toss the mistakes and keep trying until you get it right. So I've made lots of mistakes with cooking. And I think the same is true of entertainment. Once you see it's bad, you better go and reshoot it. If something doesn't work out, it's like, why do you have playback? I mean, I think Clint Eastwood talked about playback and having the ability to do that because he worked with film. The great thing that happened was you had video playback with the Panavision. And because you had the recording to now look at what would happen on the film, you could see whether you liked what the outcome was. And I feel like that gets back to people telling me I couldn't do something. It's like, I'm not afraid to make lots of mistakes. I just don't want to reveal those mistakes, something I learned in consulting. Just don't let people see you sweat, Once you've made the mistakes, you just, throw it under the rug and it's a mistake, The team can know, but, the audience shouldn't know. We don't want the audience to see the errors. We don't want them to see the messiness of your life. When you're making a movie or a TV show, you want the final product to be, Bingo.
Chef's kiss.
Yeah, chef's kiss.